Welcome to Unleashed at Work and Home, the show dedicated to helping veterinarians, vet techs, dog trainers, shelter and rescue workers, pet sitters, and all the other animal-crazy pet professionals manage their stress and find more joy. I'm your host, Colleen Pilar, and I'm thrilled you're here with us today. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on your favorite app so that you won't miss a single episode. This episode is brought to you by our free community, the Circle of Resilient and Thriving Pet Professionals. If you like the ideas shared here, then you're invited to continue the conversation with other lifelong learners in the community. You can find out more at colleenpilar.com. It's the perfect place for you to learn cool stuff, feel good, and take action to create the life you love. Come join us. Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home. My guest today is Liz Ford from Best Friends Dog Academy. Thanks so much for joining me today, Liz.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
I'm so delighted to have you. So why don't we just start with, why don't you tell our friends who are listening what you do?
So I am a behavior consultant. This is what my elevator speech is. I'm a behavior consultant and I work primarily with canines. I work privately in-home with clients. So I travel to them, or sometimes I'll work with them over Zoom or another virtual platform. Primarily, I work with clients who have dogs that are struggling with things like fear, anxiety, stress, aggression, things like that.
That's a very good elevator pitch. Just sum it right up and succinct so people can get that. I think elevator pitches are incredibly hard. Like when people say, "What do you do?" I'm like,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I think particularly in the pet professional world, some of our kind of elevator pitch job description things, they don't come close to encompassing what we really do.
Right. Right. And people don't have any very good idea of what it is we really do. So wouldn't it be lovely if we all had words that could explain and encapsulate what we do? And you have pretty good words there. It doesn't do the full breadth of it, but it gives people an idea, which is awesome. So one question I always like to ask people, because I think it's just fascinating, is what did you think when you were a kid you were going to be when you grew up? So, 10-year-old Liz, what was she imagining for her future?
Wow, that's a great question for me. 10-year-old Liz was absolutely in love with dogs and horses. And I think that's pretty much all I could think about. And that's not where my career initially went, but it's where my career kind of circled around back to.
Oh, do tell.
When I was 13, I had my mind set on doing something with animals. And so my parents said, well, the only thing that's out there that's going to help you make a living is being a veterinarian.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went through this program that was like an after-school program for kids who wanted to learn about different vocations. And one of the first things that we did is we visited a vet clinic, and we were going to be watching a cat get declawed. And so they were preparing the cat, and there was probably 6 or 8 of us kids standing around watching this veterinarian and technician. And I couldn't watch it. I didn't faint or anything, but I had to leave the room.
Yeah.
And when my mom picked me up, I said, I can't be a veterinarian because I can't do that kind of stuff to animals.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where I think probably some seeds were planted. But back then, there really weren't a lot of other career paths when it came to working with animals. I didn't really understand or know zoology. I think that was around back then. But, if you were becoming a veterinarian, well, then you had to figure out you were going to do something else. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So fast forward to college, and I got my degree from the University of Iowa, a bachelor's degree in business and aging studies, the studying of geriatrics. And I loved doing that. I was not necessarily a good student in college. I was a very good partier, but I made it through college in a few extra years. And I started working in the business field. I started working in like sales and marketing and retail sales and retail sales management. And that was actually my first experience with positive reinforcement teaching. So we can come back to that if you want. But I ended up working for a lumber company that was kind of like the stores you see nowadays that are like Lowe's or Home Depot, one of those kind of places.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for 13 years and worked my way up into management. And I needed to do something different at one point because my company wasn't doing well. And it looked like they were going to declare bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just decided to just go get a job and not write it out. And some people that knew me kind of recruited me into this entirely new field, which was the field of insurance reimbursement. And so I did that. It was a great paying job. I did that for a number of years, and it was it was a job that paid the bills. It didn't feed my soul. And I remember the day very vividly when there was a big hoarding situation at our local shelter. And I had started volunteering for the shelter a year or two before that because I helped my sister-in-law start a pet sitting business. And I said, well, we need to volunteer so that we can get clients, right? So I was a little bit involved on the periphery of this animal shelter, mostly doing fundraising and program development, not really hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
But this day, I'm sitting at my desk in the reimbursement insurance department, and I heard that there was a big incident happening at the animal shelter. And there was a call that was put out for, we need like all hands on deck. Anybody who's a volunteer. Doesn't matter what you volunteered, whether you've helped with animals or not, we need you. So I went into my boss and I said, any chance I could take the rest of today off and tomorrow? And by that time the news was out. People knew what was happening. She was very compassionate and loved animals herself. She said, absolutely. And gave me a donation to take along. And I think that was the turning point. That was the point where I was like, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
This feeds my soul, right?
Yeah.
Like, this makes me feel like at the end of the day, I have done something good. And that because of what I have done, the world is going to be better, you know, especially better for these animals and people who love them. But
how long ago was that?
So that was like 2021, 2022. I think right in there. And so it took about maybe a year. And the animal shelter had a fundraising program. They raised enough money to hire a part-time volunteer coordinator for 10 hours a week. And so I took that job. And then I was really hooked. And it wasn't long before programs were expanding and more donations were coming in, and they were able to hire me as a full-time person. Mm-hmm. And so I started as a volunteer. I worked my way to volunteer coordinator and program director, and I became the executive director for the fundraising arm. And my animal welfare career had taken off. Yeah. And I loved it, right? I loved it. In those days, you know, I was in my early 30s and I was like full of energy, and I could do the 12 and 14-hour days and just dug in and was like ready for the next one because it was so satisfying, right? Mm-hmm. And I became really interested in behavior during those years. And so when the animal shelter had a job opening for a technician to come on board, I applied for that job. And I made a switch from doing more of the volunteer program, kind of fundraising stuff, diving into shelter work, right? Mm-hmm. And I did that for 4 years and loved it. And I had a really amazing supervisor who gave me a lot of opportunities to learn. And I think that's when I realized that learning could actually really be fun if you were driven by something that you were so passionate about.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so when she left her position, I applied for it and I became the shelter director. I was also an animal control officer, and I did that for about another 5 years as like, it was just the most amazing experience. Like, I had a fantastic team of people working with me, and we accomplished so much. It was really satisfying, and also really, really hard work,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and those 12 and 14-hour days, and the compassion and the drive and the work, I was starting to see that I needed to find something that I could have the stamina and strength to do for the rest of my life. And that I kind of saw for me that that kind of career in animal welfare, that it was going to be time for me to get out at some point. Like, I knew that compassion fatigue, I don't even know that we used that word back then, but I knew what it was. I felt it.
Yeah.
And I had always had this interest in behavior. And so when the time came, when things lined up for me, I resigned and started dog training business, Best Friends Dog Academy. I started with a dear friend of mine who had a similar path in another state, but had recently moved back to Iowa. And we ran it together until COVID. And then she retired, and it's been my little baby business since then. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
It
So I've had a
sounds
lot
like
of
every
different
time there was a
struggles.
need, you just dove in. Like, you started as a shelter volunteer, and then, oh, well, we need someone to do this. And you're like, me, we need someone to do this. Me. So you worked your way all the way up through that. But with all the roles, like being a technician and being animal control officer, and then also directing the people and programming aspects of the work as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
So
was fun.
it was fun.
It
Yes.
still is fun.
So you did mention, I think I want to cycle back to it. One
Yeah.
of the challenges of my brain is that I always have like 8 questions I want to ask in response to what someone shares with me. And so sometimes on the podcast, there's this moment where I'm like, I have to say something now. But I'm going to go back to the little seed you dropped for us, which was your first experience with positive reinforcement back when you were doing the retail sales management. Tell me a little bit about that and what you learned there.
So I was in my late 20s, and I worked for a store manager. I was like a department manager, and I worked for the store manager. His name was Steve Martin. And he challenged me to come up with a program that would help all of our staff kind of have more satisfaction in work and feel like more pride in their work, and particularly when it came to like customer service. And so we had this system where you could earn these little buttons that were like like a treat. It was like earning a treat. And so I came up with a program where we challenged ourselves with seeing or catching someone doing something good. And so I presented this at a store meeting where we had little slips of paper. And if you saw one of your colleagues doing something good or wonderful, then you took, a couple of minutes and you write it down and you slipped it in this box. And if that particular employee got like 10 of those, then they got one of these pins. If they got 4 pins, they got like it was an amazing thing. It was like a new jacket with the logo on it, or a big Yeti cooler or something like that. It was some cool thing. And so it was pretty great because we had all these people who wanted to catch somebody else doing something good. And it would be something simple like, oh, you took the time to carry some products to a customer's car for them when, they probably could have got them on their own, but you had the time and it was, presented it and you took it out. And so that was my first experience really understanding how positive reinforcement in this situation, just hearing somebody say something good about you, how much of an impact it could have on people. And everybody loved it. Like it was a fun program, and we rolled it out to the rest of the company. It was like, wow, it works,
Did you
it's not just for
share
training.
what the things were that people were?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we did. When every store meeting, we would read them, and then the store manager, Steve Martin, would give them, a pin after they had 10 and stuff. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
So we really
And
tried to write
sharing
it.
them is such a good way of expanding people's maps too, of like
Mm,
what behaviors are possible for themselves. Like, it might not have occurred to me to carry something out to someone's car, but to hear that you were recognized for the fact that you did that, then I now have a new idea of something I
yeah,
could do that hadn't crossed my mind before.
sure.
So yeah, it's a really powerful and interesting thing, a way of modeling behavior
Yeah,
from the bottom up, like you're the ones actually doing it. Show us the
yeah,
behaviors that you see, and we will agree and share how powerful this is and move people forward that way. It's
yeah.
really cool. I do think this is my own bias here, but I think it's fascinating how we get to a spot in our lives where we can see that all of the things we did before actually played a role and mattered,
Hmm.
and they built this spot where we are. And so it would be so easy to be like, 13 years at a lumber company. Well, that's not related. Or your time, studying geriatrics, that's not related. And yet I'm sure you tap into all of that all the time in little nuanced ways of understanding where people are and what they're experiencing and how best you can support them. Creates
Yeah,
this rich tapestry of options within your brain.
yeah, absolutely. And, I didn't get into animal welfare until I was like in my 30s, my very early 30s. And I think that finding that place where I could explore some of what I felt was, becoming my purpose was such a motivator for me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think all the pieces were important to get me there. I have no regrets.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, that ties in really beautifully with the words I asked you to share with me. Well, not the words I asked you to share, but I asked you to share words, and the words you shared tie in beautifully. And the words you shared were learn more, do better, because you're a constant seeker of information. So you've already kind of demonstrated that you are someone who likes to learn more and do better. But can you tell me a little bit about how that as a phrase came into your life and what it has meant to you since then?
Sure. I'm not sure where to begin there, but at some point in my career, as I was studying behavior and learning about training alongside of this, the shelter and animal welfare career, I realized how very little I actually knew. At some point I was like, there's so much more to learn. And I feel like at times it was overwhelming for me. And I remember talking with one of my mentors about that. And the conversation that we had, I remember I was in the parking lot at the animal shelter and talking to her on the phone. And she was just really supportive and encouraging and encouraging and reminding me that seeking knowledge had gotten me as far as I had, and just that my journey wasn't over and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really helpful. And I would say that more recently, perhaps even with starting my own business and also when COVID hit, it seemed like it became more important to not just learn more about dog training and behavior, but to learn more about like relationships and a deeper understanding of, community and compassion with my animals, with my clients, with my colleagues, and also with myself. And that was something that I hadn't done before with myself.
Yeah.
And of course, you have interviewed many people and given me a lot of things to think about within that realm with your podcast over, the last several years. And so when I think about learn more, do better, it's almost like every interaction that I have with a human being or an animal is an opportunity to learn more. And I guess that includes myself too.
Mm-hmm.
We talk so much about, like, I could go a million different directions with this too. But one of the things that's coming to mind is we talk so much about in the industry about taking, like, observing the animal, looking at the body language, and constructive feedback and active listening and things like that. And I think a lot of us really try to apply that in our everyday work with our animals and colleagues, but we sometimes forget to apply those things to ourselves. And so taking the time to recognize how you're feeling about something, whether it's like something super fun and exciting or happy, or something that you're really worried about or concerned about, and noting those feelings and, giving some good thought before you move on. I think those things are really important. As I get older, it's helped me live a richer life, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So now I'm going to ask you, in what way? Richer in what way?
Oh, Colleen, that's a really good question. Before I answer that, what I would like to say is totally changing the subject, but I will come back to that. You did a podcast. I can't remember when it was. It's been a couple of years. It was one of your short ones, and it was just you. And it was about breathing.
Mm.
Okay. And you walked us through this breath exercise. And I still, I called that podcast up, at least it was probably a couple of weeks ago, and re-listened to it again to remind myself in a situation. And so I want to thank you for that, because those kinds of little, I know you like this word, ripples that you make are also something that really makes, I think, my life richer, and can make other people's lives richer when they stop and think about those things, important things to do for yourself. My focus early on was always learn more, do better for others,
Mm-hmm.
for the animals, for the community, or maybe even for my parents, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
For my friends, whatever I was doing. And now I learn more and do better for me. And just having a portion of my daily life focused on my own health and my own welfare, that makes my life richer every single day. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And it's beautiful. And thank you so much for telling me that an episode from years ago meant something to you, because so much of my work is I don't know where it goes. And so I have always hesitated to do the solo episodes, because I think, like, well, no one's really interested in what I would have to say. So I much prefer the guest episodes, because it's so much fun to interview people. So to know that one of my own standalone versions was helpful I'm grateful to hear that. And I will link to it in the show notes in case anyone's curious about that.
That would be great. Yes.
To notice for yourself, like, to learn more and do better for me. That is so off so many people's maps. Like, they are really focused on learning more and doing better in service for others, and for so many other, there are great needs, and people are inspired to fill them. And there's a real truth in that learning more and doing better for me actually gives you more so that you can give more. And until you learn it, you can't believe it. Like, it's just
That's
one of
so
those
true.
things. Like, you just have to wait until you have your own little, oh, that's what they were talking about moment.
Yeah, that's so true. And it kind of reminds me of that old analogy of, like, filling your cup up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you don't fill your cup, there's not going to be anything in there to give away, right? Whether your cup fills, or like there's a need and you want to fulfill it. Again, I think another common theme in our industry is you've got to take care of yourself or you're not going to be around to take care of others, you know? So, and you're right about like, you could have said that to me 10 years ago when I was, deep in the 60-hour-a-week shelter business. And I would have said, whatever, I'm going to keep working. But you do have to learn that yourself. So
yeah,
I'm glad that you offer lots of insightful opportunities and plant little seeds so that perhaps more people might explore that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think it's not an all or nothing thing. Like we can take simple little actions to see like, oh, that actually did matter to me. That did have an effect. And, but for me at least, there was an aha moment where I suddenly realized like, oh, I have actually never put myself first. Oh my goodness. Oh, wait. And to realize that and to know that on occasion I can, or that even by figuring out what keeps me sustained allows me to show up better for everyone I do care about, that's not selfish. It was for me kind of a moment like, who knew? But it doesn't have to be a moment, and it can be lots and lots of little things. And sometimes for some people, the way in is actually even to start doing it in service for others. Like if I go for a walk every day with my dog, I will be a nicer person to my family for the rest of the evening. So it sounds like you're doing it for them, but you're also doing it for you and for your dog. But this piece of like, oh, look at me refilling my cup on behalf of you, which is a mindset that I would like us to start letting go. But as a place to start, it can be really helpful when we look at what are the benefits to others if you take care of you.
Yeah. And as someone who's now a mentor myself to others, I am tempted to, try to teach the lesson. And it's they're going to have to figure that out by themselves.
Yeah. So if I could give you a magic wand and you could give all pet professionals a gift, what would you bestow upon us?
Well, I guess in keeping with our theme, I would bestow the ability to be introspectful. Is that a word?
Yeah, I don't know how you make that one. Introspection into introspectful seems like that would be the way.
Yeah. Yeah. To be able to step back and see themselves as an individual, a compassionate person, someone who's very deserving of a great life. And it doesn't mean they have to work their ass off 24/7 to get there. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. 100% deserving of a great life. I agree. And as someone who has spent a lot of time in the shelter, I'm curious if there's any little nugget you can add on top of this, because people are doing amazing work and they are deserving of a great life. And the thing that gets in the way for so many pet professionals is that the need is greater than their ability to fill. And what can help just a little bit crack that window open for them? Do you have any insights of like what's helped some of your team members in the past to realize before they are completely depleted that they really are deserving of this wonderful life?
Yeah. So thinking about those days, especially on a particular day where, we had an animal we couldn't save, or we had a cruelty case where the person walked away. I think it's easy for us humans to kind of lean into that bad, negative experience and kind of frame our perspective around it, when really in the broader scope, there are so many other cases that we won and lives that we saved. And I think that it's important to stop and count or think about, this is not a good situation in front of us, but look at what we have accomplished and look at what we can accomplish. And so that you have a better perspective and that you're not thinking about the bad stuff. We talk about humans having a negative bias. I think that you have to make a conscious effort to bring those positive experiences into the forefront and remember all of them. And, that could be doing something like, like the gratitude, like write something down that you're grateful for. Yeah. Write an experience with an animal that has happened in the past that you're grateful for, and stick that in a jar. And, do it every day before you leave work, and or Friday before you leave work, even if it's once a week. And then when the bad stuff comes around, get that jar out and look at, and share those experiences. And I think too, just alongside that, people who work side by side in those environments oftentimes become just bonded to each other in a really unique way, because you suffer through these hardships and these heartbreaking situations, but you also celebrate some pretty cool stuff together. I think it's a very unique work environment, and looking out for each other, finding some kind words to say to each other on a regular basis, not just when, times are down, can be a good way to build your resilience and help you out when things aren't going your way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, you've shared some lovely tips there for savoring and also for acknowledging and recognizing all of the things that are important and beautiful and present, even when things are hard. That there are some lovely things happening even in the midst of chaos and hard times.
Yeah.
So, this has been a really interesting and insightful conversation. I'm so grateful. If people wanted to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
The best place to find me is really through my website, which is bestfriendsdogacademy.com. I'm on social media, but I have been very careful about how much time I spend on social media these days.
Me too.
Because I'm kind of trying to keep that positive balance. So my website's the best place to get a hold of me. If you want to contact me, I am in Iowa, and that would be great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. This has been such an interesting and insightful conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Colleen. I really appreciate your time. And again, I'm honored to have this conversation with you.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed at Work and Home. I invite you to come learn more at ColleenPilar.com, where you can be steady, be strong, and be long.